This talk and the JavaScript for WordPress conference are brought to you by our sponsors at 10up and WP Buffs. 10up makes a better web with finely crafted websites and tools for content creators. Check out their junior and senior dev positions at 10up.com/careers. WP Buffs provides 24/7 fully managed support and white label agency services. Find out how they can help you focus on what you do best at wpbuffs.com/partnerships.
All right, sounds good. So, hey everyone, I'm Chris Ferdinandi. I teach people vanilla JavaScript. And today I'm going to be talking to you about moving beyond WordPress as a simple CMS or website front end, and instead using it as a powerful behind the scenes workhorse that lets you do more awesome stuff. So for about 10 years, I've run various blogs and websites, even web applications on WordPress. I'm a web performance addict, and last year I decided to switch over to Hugo, a static site generator, after using WordPress for over a decade for performance benefits. All the dynamic content and interaction on my website is now handled by JavaScript, where a lot of this stuff used to be handled by WordPress-based templates and back-end kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean that I don't use WordPress anymore. I actually still do quite a bit. I just don't use it as a traditional CMS or front end anymore. So these days I'm using WordPress to do things like handle API integrations, map over to user or manage user accounts, and access to data for membership sites. And anything where I need a server, not just an HTML file with some CSS and JavaScript thrown in. I could build this stuff in like a node server or whatever, but WordPress provides so many tools and resources that make things really, really easy. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going to do this by walking through 3 different examples of ways that you could use WordPress as more than just a traditional website front end or CMS. Specifically, we're going to be looking at things like if you're trying to integrate through third-party APIs with JavaScript and you need to manage secrets or private information, how do you keep that secret? Because obviously throwing that in a JavaScript file exposes it to anybody who can look at that file. So we'll look at how you can use WordPress as a middleman to handle that stuff for you. We're also going to be looking at using WordPress as the CMS layer, but not the front-end layer for something like a single-page app. So it becomes a GUI where you can handle all your content if you have clients who are maybe more comfortable with that model. And then you can handle everything else in a separate front-end somewhere using a JavaScript framework or vanilla JavaScript or whatever kind of your passion happens to be there. And then finally, the thing that I think is perhaps the most powerful capability of WordPress, I'm going to look at how to use it as a backend for a JavaScript-based web app. So who am I? Why should you trust anything I have to say? So I'm Chris Ferdinandi. I teach people vanilla JavaScript over at my website, gomakethings.com. I write daily JavaScript tips that come straight to your inbox every Monday through Friday. I'm the author of a set of vanilla JavaScript pocket guides that teach beginners JavaScript, even if they're coming in with no background knowledge. I run an online training program, the Vanilla JavaScript Academy. I'm the creator of the Vanilla JavaScript Toolkit, and I also run a semi-regular Vanilla JavaScript podcast. In addition to those things, I also do consulting, mentoring, private training and team training, things of that nature. And I've had students from places like Chobani, 10up, who's one of the sponsors of this awesome event, the Boston Globe, and my code has been used by companies like Apple and Harvard Business School. So I'm based out in rural Massachusetts. I live near some horse farms with my rescue dog and my family. Love Pixar movies and pirates. And so in a lot of my projects, you see either nautical references or references to Pixar movies and things like that. Yeah, so anyways, that's me. Let's dive right into it. The first thing that we're going to look at is API secrets. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we can kick off. All right, cool. I'm going to use WordPress, or Mailchimp rather, as an example here. But so on my homepage, for example, I have my daily newsletter. You can sign up. Now, WordPress or Mailchimp rather gives you this really awesome, just kind of drop-in form that you can use, this embeddable form that people can sign up and it'll add them to stuff. There's a couple of things that are a little disappointing about it though. So for example, if you have multiple, if you have one list with a bunch of different segments, and maybe you have a special form for people to get added to this other segment, like a custom 5-day tutorial on something or something like that. If they go to sign up and they're already on your list, they're going to get a message that tells them to jump over to their account and adjust their settings rather than just updating their settings automatically, things like that. So for those reasons, I like to use kind of my own form that I control with the Mailchimp API. And that's great, but there's just one problem. The Mailchimp API requires you to include a secret and so an API key and a list ID, and you don't necessarily want those things exposed publicly on the web because then anybody can mess with your list. They can add people, remove people, do all sorts of terrible things. So historically, I've used some sort of server-side implementation, but it ends up being pretty slow. So instead, what I want to show you today is how you can use WordPress to kind of provide that middle layer and keep all your stuff secret. So let's open up just a static HTML file here. This is, let's see where to go. Yeah, so here we go. So this is my email list form right here. So it's just really simple, hideous website. And on the back end, you can see it's really just a form. I've included this action over to the Mailchimp thing so that if it for some reason fails, people get redirected over to Mailchimp and they can still sign up. But the kind of the key stuff here is that you've got an input where you can put your email address. I've got this form here that's labeled, it's got this class of honeypot. So this is just a catch-all field. I'm trying to prevent robots from signing up, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then you can see this other input right here. It's hidden. It's got some random string and some random value that aren't actually the values that are supposed to be there, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And then your sign up button. And there's this empty div here where we might display a status. And then I'm calling this function, Mailchimp. So if I open up my JavaScript file, what I'm doing is I am listening for submit events in the browser. And I'm going to run the submit handler. So I'm going to prevent the default, when that form is submitted, I'm going to prevent the default form submission from happening. I'm going to clear out any content that might exist in this error message window. I'm going to run some validation stuff, which we'll look at in a minute. And then if all goes well, I'm going to submit the form. So let's see what's actually happening here. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that they actually provided an email address. So for example, if I try and hit submit, it's going to throw this message, please provide an email address. And this is just a little something I've squirreled away up top. And then we're going to run an email validity check. So this is something to be perfectly honest, I pulled off Stack Overflow, but it's just a regex pattern that makes sure that the email is valid. And if it's not a valid email, it's going to tell them that. So, if I do this, it's going to say, please use a valid email address. But assuming that it is valid, it's going to submit the form. So the first thing it's going to do is disable the button. And what that does is, and this part's a little less important, but it's giving that button a disabled attribute so they can't click it again. And then grabbing whatever I have here. So in this case, it's going to change the text of the button to signing up while they're signing up. And then when they're done, it'll switch it back. And then, when it's done, we'll re-enable the button. But the real key piece here is the sending of the data. So I'm just using XML HTTP request or XHR to send this. And if you don't know about this, please head over to gomakethings.com. I have a whole bunch of articles on using Ajax with vanilla JavaScript. You could also use jQuery or your favorite framework of choice if that's easier for you. There's a ton of great plugins for this sort of thing too. But I'm setting up an XHR request. I am sending data to an endpoint. And then when I get my response back, I'm just going to update the DOM with that sort of information. You can actually see what that looks like here. So let's, there we go. I gotta use a fake one because I'm already signed up here. Actually, let me show you what this looks like if I'm not. So this is going to come back with, I've successfully signed up. So great. But so how did that all work? What's actually happening here? So I'm doing a couple of things. I actually have this plugin I set up, Mailchimp WP REST API. What I'm doing is I'm taking advantage of the WordPress REST API to create a custom integration with Mailchimp. In my JavaScript file, let's see if I can find that URL. Yeah, so I'm pointing to my website, and then this is that custom endpoint I've set up. So at WP JSON, it's Mailchimp or GMT Mailchimp /v1/subscribe. And if we come in here and look at what we're doing, here you can see I'm setting up this GMT Mailchimp v1 subscribe endpoint, and I have my callback method here. And in my callback, I'm passing in the request, and then I'm actually serializing the form. So I have a function that's going to take all the data from that form. So the honeypot, the username, and then this hidden string and field. And I am going to use all that information on the server. So the first thing we're going to do is check against a whitelist. So one of the things that this plugin gives you is a settings page. On the settings page, I can do things like provide my API key, the list ID I want to submit it to, a form key and secret, so that if someone did get this stuff, there's still kind of this extra layer here. And then a honeypot field. So if someone fills that field in, we're just going to ignore what they did. And then finally, I wanted an extra layer of security, so I set up some whitelisted domains. So if the request doesn't come from one of these whitelisted domains, it won't go through successfully. So that's what this is checking for. And then I'm going to grab that key and secret from my options menu. I am going to, if for some reason those don't exist, I can't make an API call. So I'm returning a new WordPress REST response with a 400 error. I'm going to check the honeypot field. If it's filled out, I'm going to also throw an error. Make sure the email is valid. If it's not, throw an error with a custom message. But assuming all that works, I am going to take all of my content, and then I am, this is a whole bunch of Mailchimp specific stuff, but where it gets interesting is down here. So here I can use the WordPress remote post method to actually make a call to the Mailchimp API using my secret and list ID, which I'm able to keep private and out of JavaScript. And then it gets back some information. So here it's, it's making a call. If the subscriber already exists, it's going to go ahead and update their profile rather than just throwing back an error saying you're already signed up. It'll update it with any kind of custom options from the form. And then assuming that all goes well, it's going to throw back a custom message, which I can then use with JavaScript to update the DOM. So this provides me with a tremendous amount of flexibility to keep all that private stuff private without having to run everything server side. So I can run kind of this WordPress instance that really just acts as a middle layer and doesn't do much else. So that's one of the biggest things I use this for. I have a whole bunch of things on my site that I use that involve, and these are obviously all fake, but I have a whole bunch of stuff on my site that I'm using that involves making API calls to WordPress, which then makes API calls to somewhere else and then passes that information back just to keep private data private. So that's that. One of the other big, I think really big use cases for WordPress, if you're not actually going to use it as a front end, is acting as a CMS for something like a single page app. So let's actually jump back into this back end over here. So I have 3 posts in here, the default hello world, and then 2 additional ones that I created. And you can see those are all showing up here. Only this page isn't generated by WordPress at all. This is actually just a static HTML file. Let's open that up. So it's just a static HTML file that just has this empty, well, I guess it's not really empty. It's just fetching the latest post, but there's mostly empty div with the ID of app. And this is super bare bones, so there's no like header link or anything because it's just for demo purposes. But it's basically just an empty HTML file. And then I have this little 3 kilobyte JavaScript file that I'm using to handle all of the good stuff. So the first thing I'm doing is when the page loads, I'm going to get my posts. And the way this works is I'm actually taking advantage of the just out of the box WordPress REST API, which we can actually see just by pulling it up in a browser. So it always follows, your website /wp-json/wp/v2. And then there's a whole bunch of different endpoints you can call, but the one to get all of your posts and content is /posts. And you can see it returns back this crazy nested object with a whole bunch of different content. It's got an object for each post, and each post includes a bunch of information, including a post date, the post ID, title, the actual content, an excerpt, if you don't want to show the whole content, and so on and so forth. There's media tucked in here. You've got like featured images or things like that. It's just a whole bunch of content. So we can ignore a lot of this for now, but I'm again making an Ajax call just to get request to that URL. And when it's successful, I'm going to run a method called show posts. I have my response. I'm passing it into that argument, all the data that I get back. And in my show posts method here, I've got the data itself, and then this Boolean called single. So if we were looking at individual posts, and I'll look at what that might look like in a minute. But I'm going to do a slightly different layout. So the first thing I want to do is make sure there's any content. If there's no content, we want to display some sort of no posts yet message. If it is an individual post, we're just going to show that one post. So we're going to take that data object, which is an array. We're going to grab the first item in it. There's only one item, but we're going to grab that item. We're going to pop in the title and the content, and then just call it a day. But if there's a bunch of posts, I'm going to set up this string here, and I'm going to loop through each item in that object of posts I got back, creating some markup to go along with it. For each one, I'm going to create a heading. I'm actually going to create a URL here, following the traditional out-of-the-box WordPress install setup for this one, because I didn't want to mess around with routing and figure that all out. But so the question mark P equals, and then the post slug, the title, and then I'm just going to show the excerpt for this one. And after each post, we will include just an HR element to add a line. And then when that's all done, that app element, which I've saved to a variable up here, but that app element, we are going to set its inner HTML. Oops, sorry, wrong spot. Its inner HTML to the content that we created. And that is what gets us this. And so you can see that loads pretty fast. It's a pretty nice feature. The other piece here is, so I could just work entirely on, so there's two ways I can handle kind of clicking into a post as well. So when I click this, you can see if I hover over this, or actually here, we'll click it. Actually, you know what? It didn't open up the, I didn't set that part up. That's right. So if I were to, let's open this in another tab. So you can see here, the URL is that question mark P equals, and then the slug. So what are we doing about that? You may have noticed on this get posts argument, I'm doing this get query string P call here. So that's a helper function I have that's going to check the URL, and if some query string that I pass in exists, it's going to get that value. In show posts, let's see, where did that go? In get posts, rather, yeah. So in get posts, if there's an ID, I am actually going to append that as the slug to the end of our URL here. And what that does, that modifies the WordPress REST API to get a specific post. So I can just go ahead and get that specific post. Now, this setup is super convenient because I don't have to do anything else. I can just click links, and on page load, it'll automatically open up the page. But that doesn't really get you performance benefits. So 10up actually used an approach like this last year. I think it was last year. It may have been the year before at this point, for whamu.org. So you can see on that initial page load, they've got some placeholder content as the site loads. And then after that, everything loads really, really quickly. And the way that's able to work is they don't have to reload everything on the page, just the core content changes. So the scaffolding always remains in place. You can see this navigation never has to reload. And it's just the on-page content that gets pulled up, which makes the whole experience really, really fast. A lot faster than if they were just using a traditional WordPress build. So it's really, really kind of a nice setup they have going here. The version I showed you is just a super boring, super bare bones kind of setup. So to take advantage of something like that, you can actually add in this additional step. So I'm actually going to listen for click events in the browser. I'm going to ignore when people right click or command or control click to open it up in a different tab. And then I'm going to check and make sure that the link, the event target, is an external site. So if the host name matches that of the window they're currently looking at, we can just ignore everything. But otherwise, we can go ahead and call that get post argument again, passing in that query string value and the URL as the thing that it's going to analyze. And it'll grab that slug and make a call. And because we are only updating this content right here, we don't have to re-download, like if I had a whole bunch of style sheets and JavaScript, it doesn't have to download any of that. It's just grabbing the markup. So it becomes very, very fast, especially as your site gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now I'm using vanilla JavaScript here just because that's my favorite flavor. But if you, if you did something like if you worked in React or Vue, the WordPress REST API gives you so many incredible capabilities there that you can take advantage of. It's just really, really, really useful. And you can see how this works in real time. So you have clients who really like to work in a GUI like this. I can go ahead and create, JavaScript for WordPress post. Wow, cannot type today. Here's another new post. We'll go ahead and hit publish. And then on my front end, there's my latest post. It just shows up. It's right there. So that's kind of the third or the second use case, one that I'm starting to see more and more of. I've also heard of people using the WordPress REST API to integrate with things like Contentful as part of a React-based static website generator and things like that, which allows you to author everything in native JavaScript and then just have it kind of pre-compile ahead of time, which is another really cool use case. And then the last example here, the one I actually use this for the most is I actually use it as an account management system for JavaScript-based web apps. So this is the courses portal for the video versions of my Pocket Guides and the Vanilla JavaScript Academy that I run. So this entire thing is powered with some HTML files and some JavaScript. And then it just makes calls back to the WordPress backend to handle all of the user management stuff. So you can see I could go create an account. And in this case, it's going to give me an error. But if I were to do, some fake email address, this one's going to throw me an error here telling me that I should use the same email address I used when I purchased courses. So there's a lot of really rich integration you can do here. But it also allows me to sign in. You can see there was that kind of placeholder content, but this is all very, very fast. Like you see how quickly everything loads up here. And then I'm going to load up, I'm just going to go from course to course. If I were to toggle to the next, this page just loads like nearly instantly. All the delay here is actually on Vimeo's side because they're the ones who do my video hosting. This is all powered with JavaScript, except for the user management stuff. So, for example, I may want to change my password, things like that. This is all so much easier with WordPress. So let's take a look at how that works. Now, as you already know, you can set up custom endpoints with the WordPress REST API. there's another method that you can also use that I actually found a little bit easier for this project, and that's with the WordPress Ajax endpoint. So it's wp-ajax.php at your domain. You can use that endpoint to make calls. And the way this works is you create a function, and whatever you want to do in that function. When it's done, you would add an action with wp-ajax. So I am giving this a, excuse me, I'm sorry. So it's wp-ajax, and then here's the name of the function. So it's underscore, and then whatever that function name is should show up here. This is the action for stuff that should be available to users who are logged in. And then this no priv version is if you also want this available to users who are logged out. And then this thing here is the action. So when you submit the Ajax call to your endpoint, with the WordPress REST API, you have a bunch of different endpoints that do a bunch of different things. With this one, there's just one endpoint. And then as part of a query string parameter, you're going to have the key of action and some value. And that's how it knows what to run. So when I use the GMT Ajax users is logged in action, that's going to run this function. What we're going to look at specifically today is actually logging a user in, because I think it's kind of an interesting use here. So I've got this Ajax users login function. I am going to first make sure that this is an Ajax request, so people can't just visit that page directly. This is checking to make sure that XML HTTP request is in the XML header, and if it's not, it's going to bail. And then I'm also going to make sure that the user isn't already logged in, which is super easy to do thanks to the WordPress is-user logged in helper method. With this one, instead of that WP REST response helper method, we use WP send JSON, which is going to return a JSON object back. And in that, we can set up an array that has our data. So I'm going to provide a code, a status, and then some sort of message. But this can be whatever you want in this array. This is just kind of this custom thing I do when a user creates a new account. We send them an email and validate them. So if that validation key is still there, because it gets removed when they validate. So if they haven't validated themselves, we're going to send them a message telling them to validate their account first. This is just a way to prevent people from trying to sign up from someone that they know bought the course that is not them. And now we get into the WordPress goodness. So I'm setting up this credentials variable. In it, I'm going to provide a user login, which we're going to get from the information that's passed into this Ajax request. And the way it works is it's a post method request with some form data. So we can actually call this the PHP post object and get all of our data. So I'm going to grab the user login from the post username, the password from the post password. And then in this case, I'm just going to set remember to true so they stay logged in. And then I'm going to call the WordPress sign-in method with their credentials. If that fails for some reason, we'll again return a new JSON method with their errors. If it's successful, though, we can return a JSON object with the status code of 200, success status, and the user is logged in. And you can go about kind of doing whatever you need to do. So let's see what that looks like elsewhere. So we've seen kind of how that would look in our PHP, but what does that look like from an HTML and JavaScript perspective? So in my HTML file here, I've just got a really simple sign-in form. It's got the login for an ID of login form, a field for username, password, a place to display errors if there were any, and then again, just kind of a submit button. And we can see what that looks like on the front end. Where is it? Right here. So this is my sign-in form. Nothing too fancy. And then if I open up my JavaScript file, we are going to listen for submit events in the browser and check if the event target, so the thing that was the form that was submitted, if it has that login form ID. If it doesn't, we're going to bail. We're only going to want to run the rest of the stuff for the login form. If it does, though, we're not going to submit the form. We're instead going to grab that information and do something with JavaScript. Inside our form, I'm going to look for that username field and that password field. If they either don't exist or they're empty, so if there's no value for either of those, we're going to bail. And for this really simple example, I am just relying on just native browser validation for these fields. In the real world, you'd want to do some actual checking of these with JavaScript and show a custom error message. But assuming that all works, I'm going to call this sign-in method to try and sign in the user. I want to pass in that username and password. In this function, I'm going to create a new XHR request. Here is that request URL. So I have this local localhost thing set up at JS for WordPress. So that's my site. And then the endpoint here is wp-admin/admin-ajax.php. And that's how you call that file. These are, so Onreadystatechange, this is what's going to happen when the request is either successful or fails. If it's successful, we're going to log them in. Otherwise, we're going to show some sort of error message. There's a couple of important pieces with using the admin Ajax approach instead of the REST API. The first is that we need to set that header of XML HTTP request. You may remember that the very first thing this does is make sure that it's an Ajax request, just for security reasons. So we want to make sure that we're letting them know this is actually an Ajax request. So whatever, if you use a plugin for this, whatever, just make sure that header is set. Finally, or the next piece of this rather is we want to set this to form URL encoded, just so that we pass along the appropriate type of information. And then as part of our send method here, we're actually going to pass in all of the interesting stuff that the PHP endpoint needs to know. So our specific action, the username, and the password, all as part of this string of query information. Let's assume for a second that there was some sort of error. So let me try and log in with something that is decidedly not my password here. Oh, so it's actually telling me I'm already logged in. Okay, so that's valid. So I did get an error back. That error message was that I am already logged in because I'm already logged into the back end here. So let's go ahead and fix that actually, so that we can do this for real. No, that's not right. JS for WordPress admin. All right, so let's sign out. All right, let's try that again. Okay, so the username or password I provided is not valid because I typed in the wrong password. So that's, so what's actually happening here? This can actually go away. That was from an earlier test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the response we get back. I'm going to run it through JSON parse to convert it from a string into a JSON object. I'm going to pass that into the show error helper function. And then inside this function, I am going to grab that form error field. And if it exists, I'm going to add some text content that says, something went wrong. Now, in our case, we actually got a successful response back. What this is actually doing is this will run if, for some reason, the server returned back any sort of error. So you're always going to get back, unlike a traditional endpoint, you're always going to get back a success if it was able to connect with the endpoint, even if it didn't do what you wanted to do, because we're just using WordPress, the WP send JSON thing. So it's always getting back data. So that's really only if I tried to connect to the wrong server or the server was down, something like that. So everything that you've seen so far actually went through this login function. So again, the data comes in, and here I'm actually checking the status code. So if it's 200, if it was successful, we are going to show that I just logged in. Otherwise, we're going to take whatever message gets sent back, and we're going to display that in the DOM. And that's what you're seeing here. So let's actually try and log in with the correct password, though. And now you can see that I have successfully logged in. So I don't know if it'll actually log me out here. Log me in here. Let's see what happens if I go to WP admin. Yep. So you can see I'm now actually logged back in. So I handled that from the front end with some JavaScript thing. and now I am logged back in on the back end. If this is something that seems interesting to you, one of the things I've set up specifically for you all as participants in this is a page with a whole bunch of resources and tutorials and things like that. So if you head over to gomakethings.com and click on this URL right up at the top, JS4WP, you have a bunch of stuff, including all of the assets from this talk. So all of the HTML, all of the PHP, just absolutely everything is out there. And what that includes is this Ajax user management helper that I have set up. And this includes a whole bunch of different endpoints you can use to do things like check if the user is logged in, actually log them in, log them out, validate a new account, change passwords. If someone provides an old password or a new password, you can update their password dynamically with JavaScript for them. Retrieving lost passwords. This is a helper to check if password reset key is valid and kind of handling all of that. As you might imagine, password reset protocol is pretty complex. And doing things like actually creating new accounts. So it's, if you wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about how this works, feel free to dig in, or you can ping me in Slack and we can talk about it a little bit later. But those were kind of the three big areas that I wanted to focus on today. So if you found this talk interesting, or you feel like you want to dig a little bit more into stuff like this or vanilla JavaScript, head over to gomakethings.com, where you can learn about all of my stuff. Access a whole bunch of useful resources, including some stuff I put together just for you guys. I also have a special 30% discount for participants in this workshop for any of my pocket guides or bundles using the code JS4WP. Cool. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to jump over into the Slack room and see if anybody had any questions, and we can go from there.
Thanks for watching this talk from the JavaScript for WordPress conference. If you're interested in more talks like this, head over to javascriptforwp.com/conference to see an archive of all talks, as well as information about upcoming events.